Video will be walking you through the strategic planning assignment. I'm actually not going to bring the assignment up. Please go to the assignment tab and download the actual worksheet. So to complete this assignment, we have provided you with a worksheet and you can fill in the blanks as you work through each of the questions. You may complete this assignment individually or in a small group. In fact, it might actually help if you do have a small group and you are new to volunteer management. So the goal for this particular assignment is to pull everything that you have learned together in the program as you're actually preparing to graduate from the program, and think about next steps, especially if you have a volunteer program. You have created all sorts of tools and resources. You have lots of ideas of things you would like to do, things you would like to implement, but you're not quite sure what to do. So we're going to actually go back to the first course where we introduced you to the Canadian Code for Volunteer Involvement. And you're going to access the audit tool, which is in the course, and we will be loading it in this particular module. What we would like you to do before you even start this particular program is take 5 or 10 minutes and do a quick audit of your volunteer program. If you need to, this is where it helps to have a small group, so that you're not actually having to make up a completely hypothetical situation for your program planning. So start with the audit tool, reviewing the Canadian Code for Volunteer Involvement. The other thing I can't stress enough is please join the Zoom meetings. We will be doing a lot of brainstorming and working through some of the questions, especially a wave exercise and a SWOT exercise during the Zoom meetings. And the modules have specific notes on the slides that directly link you to the question. So as you're working through the two modules, please look for, I believe it's in red, there is a slide that indicates referencing question number 1 for this particular assignment. So all of these things will help you complete the assignment. So when we look at the workbook or the worksheet you're given, the first thing that you're asked to do is conduct a SWOT of your existing volunteer program. And when we look at the conducting a SWOT, we are looking at it from both an internal perspective, so what's happening within your organization, within your volunteer program, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, what are some opportunities you have, and also potentially the threats that your program might be facing. It's just as important to take an external look at all the things that are happening outside of your organization that can impact your volunteer program, from every stage of the volunteer management processes. So we look at it through two different lenses. This one is got some great ideas, and again, we will be talking about it and doing some brainstorming for a SWOT in the actual Zoom class meeting. The next question that you're asked in this worksheet is to identify the current issues that your volunteer program has. So going back to the audit tool that you have gone and done a quick look through, and what you have in place, somewhat in place, not in place, this is where you can take a look at, okay, I think I'm having all of these particular programs or issues in my volunteer program. When we look at this particular example, the volunteers are arriving, staff aren't ready. It doesn't matter if it's their workstation being ready or having the materials ready. So there's an issue for between the staff and the volunteers. The clients who are the recipients of the service are not booked in. So you have a volunteer who's scheduled, they're now ready and willing to carry out their activities, but they have no clients available to help them with their tax preparation forms. Then what another problem that they're incurring is staff are asking the volunteers for help. So at peak times during the tax season, the staff are overwhelmed and they want all the volunteers they can get. They want all the volunteer assistance that they can gather to help with all the data entry and the completion of all the income tax forms. But what happens is when it's quiet, they don't have a use for the volunteers, or the volunteers are almost dumped on. The staff don't bother greeting them, preparing for them, giving them any direction. They don't check in with them, provide any support or any kind of recognition. So that's a real gap in services for both staff and volunteers. And also, the staff truly don't understand what their role and responsibilities are, and also what the roles and the responsibilities of the volunteers are. So, going back to your Canadian Code for Volunteer Involvement, your audit tool, you could kind of pull together, just looking through the audit tool, where some of those issues might be occurring and actually make a connection to the actual standard and one of the components in the standard. So that's what you're looking for. If you're not having issues and you're definitely looking for program planning, you can use whatever you've recognized or pulled out from your audit tool. But rather than just jumping right into program planning and saying, I've got all these problems, I've got all these issues, this is what I think is important, you need to take a step back. So when we're doing strategic program planning, and especially with this particular worksheet, we have built in the evaluation piece, because you have literally will be not only planning for your volunteer program, we're putting all the checks and balances in place so that when you complete your plan, you actually have, I'm going to say, between 80 and 90% of the program evaluation pieces built into your plan. Saves you a lot of work in the long run because you're building and working on both at once. So, going back to the question, how do I prove I have these problems? Well, you go right back to your audit tool. You can share the results of the audit, where you can explain these are the standards, these are the components, this is what we have in place, don't have in place, have somewhat in place. That's a great way to confirm you have some issues. This one's carrying out a brief, simple, non threatening survey with the staff, wanting to ask the staff who are working with the volunteers what concerns they have, what issues that they are seeing, what kinds of support or training would they like to work better with along with the staff and the volunteers, or working together as a team, I should say. And then also, I like this one, they're going to conduct exit interviews with the volunteers. So after the volunteers have finished their placement, whether it's a seasonal placement or a long-term year placement, they're going to conduct exit interviews with the volunteers, and all three of these items can definitely confirm whether or not those issues that you identified exist. Moving on to that, what you can do is then go back to your code and think about, okay, I have been able to confirm what the issues were. I've done my audit, I've done my survey, I've conducted my exit interviews. And when I link it directly back to the code, I am looking at which standards are actually the come under that area of focus. And this is as well where you can add in one or two other standards, not only just specific to your problems, but you could address some of the potential weaknesses or major program gaps. So you can't do all 10 standards. What we would like you to do is think about, if you had a wish list, what are the 6 standards that would capture your problems and issues and that you could use for program planning. And in this particular instance, the 6 standards are the volunteer roles and recruitment, evaluation, so tracking and measuring. All of these are great because they actually do address the program issues. Orientation and training, human resources, support and supervision, and recognition. So all of these standards that were narrowed down do link back to the problems. What is nice about this is when you've actually thought about it and narrowed it down to 6 standards, for example, you can use this for a long-term plan. Again, we can't do it all at once. We need to start somewhere, and we need to know how to prioritize. So if we've got our audit tool, we've got our backed up information, and we've thought about the standards, you can keep that all together and start building out a large big picture framework of what you would like to work on in your program. And there's a couple of things that we do and recommend. So based on your 6 priorities, let's make a little bit of a shorter list. So your 6 priorities could ideally be the basis for what you could call a long-term plan for your program, something that you'd like to work on over the next 2 or 3 years. We're going to bring this list down and narrow it down to what we would call a short-term plan. So, based on the 6 standards, what do you think the priorities are, or what standards do you think would be the best way for you to address the issues or the serious gaps in your programs? In other words, what are the priorities out of the 6 standards? What would be your top 3 priorities? Then, what we're going to do is we're going to build in another checks and balance, because you've got 3 priorities now. You've got a nice short-term plan that you could set out. However, you've got to prioritize and start again. Which of the 3 program standards or areas do you want to focus on, and where should you start? And to do this, we actually do 2 different things. We look at the effort and the impact, and that's in your module, and we also look at the cost-benefit analysis. And we ask you to take each of the standards and identify them and list what the benefits are. If you actually carried out your plan and worked on this particular standard, what would be the overall benefit to your volunteer program, to the staff and to the volunteers? So you can see it's described here. Then we want you to think about what are the resources you would need to carry out this actual section of the plan or this particular standard. And in this case, it's not too bad. Ballpark, the volunteer coordinator, would need about 4 hours to look at the position description, looking at targeted recruitment areas and marketing and some social media and messaging, because they already have a position description, but it really needs to be refreshed and linked to new recruitment strategies. So they're thinking for the one position, maybe 6 hours. So they put a ballpark. Again, don't go into great detail. It's just a ballpark, because if your supervisor said to you, okay, you've got this great plan, what's involved? What do we get out of it? What's the benefit to our program or to the staff and volunteers? How much of your time do we need, and how much is this going to cost me? So you have all those answers up front, and you can see, yes, this is a very simple, easy standard that you could easily carry out. The next one that was picked was the human resources. Again, they've addressed what all the different benefits are to the organization for the staff and for the volunteers. What are the resources required? So they've talked about mainly some of the staff time and broken it down into really big chunks. So for creating and distributing and evaluating that staff survey, for working and contacting and networking with the staff and the program manager about creating some training that's needed or identified based on the staff survey feedback, developing a simple handbook for staff to work with volunteers. They think for a small program, maybe 25 hours it would take of their time, and if it was broken down into an actual budget, about $875. And the reason you're not seeing too much as far as hard copies and printing is because so many things now are electronic. Here is an example of the third and final standard that they thought might be a good area to focus on, and this was on providing support and supervision and what the benefits are. Here they're talking about the volunteer coordinator's time to create formal feedback forms, exit interview forms, both paper and electronically based. Doesn't think it'll take too much time, 7 hours time to do it, and then some of the in-house printing costs, so hard copy costs. There's no cost for the online survey, and then the overall cost. So 3 potential standards that they could work on, but they had to decide, I can't do all 3. What's the best bang for my buck? What gives me the best impact for the least amount of effort? And that's something what you want to keep in mind. You want to create small, powerful wins. You also need to think about where should I be starting? And this is a really nice example. This individual decided that they wanted to start with providing staff with the training and support they need to engage and work with volunteers. It's because, and I like the rationale, the volunteer coordinator can create a marketing plan, great job descriptions, recruit those volunteers, even provide recognition, but if there's no staff buy-in, your program won't succeed. So the success of the program really depends on active support from the staff and supervision. And it's also another opportunity to talk about staff roles and responsibilities. And again, it can turn into a positive. If the staff feel less threatened, they get the support they need. It means a better, more positive environment for the staff, volunteers, and clients. And there's also a positive spin off that staff are working, might be willing to support the program more, bring in more volunteers, and get a positive message out in the community. In this particular case, this was the ideal place to start because they already had solid position descriptions in place. Just remember, if volunteer position descriptions are a foundation of a volunteer program. So, hint, if you are planning a program or you're working through this, one of the priorities you might have is to have volunteer position descriptions that are assessed for the risk, because without those, you can't build on anything. So, based on this, moving into the next question, go to the modules. We do explain how to write goals, and we have a very specific technique. And you'll notice your goal statement should start with the word to. This is a very broad based, all encompassing kind of statement. And they have literally just said to create a staff training program that supports staff in their efforts to effectively support and supervise volunteers in the community tax program. Great program goal. However, as we all know, a goal is just a big, broad based statement. That goal needs to get broken down even further into smaller steps, or in this situation we're calling them 3 big steps. So this is what your goal is. We want you to break your goal down into 3 sections or 3 steps, 3 things that you really need to carry out in order to achieve your goal. Again, in the modules, we've provided you with an actual template. You must use the template and technique for writing the objectives. The reason being is this holds you accountable. You have built in an evaluation piece in your objectives, and I'll demonstrate by showing you've got a date by when this is going to be accomplished, who is going to be carrying it out, what is going to be the result. So this is a 1-page survey. And they're going to be printed and distributed to 15 staff members. So you always have a date, the person, what it is that you're going to actually produce, and a quantifying number. So you may even have to say one. It's a 1-page survey. So here's a couple of really good ideas. This one next, they have picked out, they need to create an electronic version of a draft handbook. So they're creating the draft. What it's going to include in the handbook. So it'd be a position description, expectations, policies and procedures, techniques for supporting and supervising volunteers, and the draft is going to be distributed to 15 staff members. Date, person, one electronic version of a handbook, and it's going to 15 staff members. And then you can see there's a couple more steps. This one came into 4 steps, and that's okay. If you needed a 4th step, that's not a problem. But you've built in the accountability pieces, you've built in your evaluation piece. This will help keep you on track. What we're going to do is, normally if you were creating your action plan, think of it almost like a spreadsheet or a mind map where you start with everything and it goes out. So you've got all your long-term plans or ideas or areas of focus, and then you kind of narrow it down into some short-term plans or 3 areas of focus, and then you narrow your areas of focus down into one that you're actually going to focus on based on how you have looked at your effort impact and your benefits, the cost benefits. From there, you start writing your goals for each of those particular areas of focus, and then your areas of your goals are broken down into objectives. And from there, your map would continue to grow, and for each one of your goals, you would have your objectives. We don't want you to do all of that. All we would like you to do is get a taste for how to write a goal and how to write objectives for one area. We don't want you to do a whole huge plan. That's something you can go back to. So then what you're asked to do is take one of those objectives and break it down even more. And these are called your action steps or your action plans. So you can see they have identified the one objective from the previous question that they're going to create an actual action step plan for. And this means you've broken it down into very good, minute details, basically saying what has to be done, who is going to do it, and the timeline, when it's going to be done by. So you can see some very detailed, simple one-sentence action steps. This is the volunteer coordinator and when this is going to be carried out. And what I really liked about this example, and one of the reasons we picked it, is the person actually thought about what they'd already learned in the program and in the course, and more specifically in the previous course where you were creating all of those position descriptions and all of the tools. So they have actually referenced it and realized I can start using all of this material to support it. So they're actually going to go back to Module 11 and use some of the techniques that you were taught for providing support and supervision and feedback in this handbook. They're going to go back to Module 9, where we had to create an orientation program. And they're actually going to pull their orientation framework out. So a lot of this work's done. So really think outside the box when you're creating your action plan. Again, they're going to, for this handbook, they're going to pull the performance feedback tool, one of the assignments that you actually completed, and include it in the handbook. And then they're going to put it all together in a handbook. So this is another way to get you thinking about, I've done so many things. How can I bring in all of those resources I've created into my plans and save myself a lot of work? One thing we've seen is too many people forget all the things that you've actually done. You could pull in your policy and procedure template. You could pull in your position descriptions. That work is done, so make sure you incorporate it and use it. Don't reinvent the wheel. Next thing we want you to do is do a very quick budget for your actual action steps. So for this, we're talking about some of the expenses. You can go back to where you did your cost benefit analysis, and you'll probably find most of the expenses in there. And you can see in here they've added a couple more because they're going to have a bit of a refreshment meeting and lunch and learn workshop. Make up your numbers if you have to. Just think about them being realistic. The idea is, do you have the funding and support to continue on with your plan? Then think about, you've got this great plan, what kind of barriers am I going to run into, or some roadblocks? Think about one or two. And here, perfect example, staff may not want to provide feedback. They don't want to complete a survey. So they're going to do a draw. They're going to get a $10 gift card, and that will be the incentive to get staff to fill out the staff survey. The other thing is staff are really busy. They've got so many other tasks because of COVID. There's a lot of long meetings, so people don't have the time to meet anymore. So, two ways is to do a quick Zoom meeting. You could even record your Zoom meeting that talks about your plan, what it is you're doing, the handbook that you're rolling out, the tools that are available in it, and merely emphasize what is in it for them and the impact on their lives and how it can make their job easier, and also making sure that they send out an e-version of the handbook in advance, giving people time to take a quick look at it and provide feedback. And then the final thing is, how will you monitor your plan? And this is pretty self explanatory. You've already built in a lot of checks and balances. For this particular action step plan, all the person's going to do is drop the timelines into their Outlook calendar. So I'm hoping that this gave you some ideas of how you can work through a strategic plan and gets your mind thinking about, what can I do for my plan? And the nice thing is, when you leave the program, you can actually add this to your portfolio that shows and demonstrates you know what strategic planning is. You can talk the language, you understand what all the key components of a strategic plan is and the processes, and the same practices and processes apply whether you're part of an organizational, a department strategic plan, or a community plan. You will see all of the same simple steps and language used. Just a reminder, please make sure that you use plain language techniques.